Hi, I'm so happy to be talking with you today and talking on a theme, definitely a global theme at this point. It's been ringing all throughout you have to say, the universe, because the issue of men is an issue that is of grave concern to governments, to the church, to the corporate world, to the professional world, to families. And unless we get a hold of our understanding of men, who they are, and unless we come to grips with rescuing our men and repositioning them in a place where they need to be in society, in every sphere and in every level of society. Unless we do that, then the society will in fact crumble. And somebody once said that men are an extinct creature, a creature that's kind of going out of style. But what has been shared so far by Brian and by Gordon have really helped us to see some of the results of living in a society in which our men have been disoriented and in fact feel defeated. They have become very depressed, disoriented, deceptive, and in fact very destructive in society. And we have to deal with it. And they have been dealing with it, and the examples that they've given are showing that it's a critical need, and it takes other men and other professionals who have actually studied in the field to come to grips with it. I would like to tackle it emphasizing a couple of significant things, I think. One is that the men that have already run into trouble against the law, men who have become incarcerated, men who are way out in drugs, and men who are really suffering and struggling in the society. We look at them as very, very bad examples. But one of the things that I have learned, and I want to be able to share some of my learnings about men from the experiences that I will share. One of the things that I've learned is that regardless of where we find our men, all men are really the same and are struggling with the same kind of issues. They may manifest them in different ways. In other words, the guys in prison are struggling and suffering. They have been captured, they've been incarcerated. But those men are having the same kinds of problems and struggles. Men are having the same kinds of struggles and problems in the corporate world, in the governmental field, in the professional field, in the families, and all through society. It's just that they manifest it differently, and they are, a lot of men get away because their actions and their relationships and their destructive behavior are covered and are not recognized and not penalized. Of course, a lot of it has not actually made the press. But let me just give you a couple of examples. I have worked mainly with men in the streets, men in the in-city communities. And I want to look at that. I have worked with men who are struggling with their gender identity and in their sexuality behaviors. And I've worked with a lot of youth out there in the inner city sometimes, but youth that we see in the millennial generation and younger who are really struggling in life. But then I work with a church, and in the church, we have a lot of respectable men, but men who are really still struggling in their families and in their professional life. I can think of one of the young men, I'm going to call him a young man. He was not more than about 27 when I met him several years ago. And he was really one of the dons or the gang leaders within the inner city ghetto community. And the interesting thing is that before I met him, I thought a don was an older gentleman who perhaps in his 40s and 50s who have really achieved a lot. But it's interesting that I was working and very involved in one of the inner city communities in Kingston. And one day I was invited on a Saturday morning just to go and to see how a group of them meet together. And I wasn't quite sure who they were, but I realized that they were some of the leaders within the community. And when I went into the setting, it wasn't a room, it was an outside but enclosed area. And they were sitting there on the ground, and there were about 5 of them, and they were sitting there, and basically what they were doing was having a time of devotion. And in that time of devotion, as we sat on the outskirts and just observed them, we had to get their permission, of course, to be there. And we just observed them. But what they were doing was meditating. And they were speaking to who they call Almighty God. And about 3 of them were obviously Rastas. They had locks. And as they sat there and they chanted a little and together, and then also 1 or 2 of them would start to share from out of the scriptures, his inspired revelations. And I found that it was strange because, you know, these were gang leaders, and you thought of gang leaders as horrid, violent criminals, anti-law, and so on. But what I found was that the way in which they spoke and meditated with God was recognizing and seeing God as a strong, powerful, authoritarian leader, and one that they respected, and they looked to him for guidance, and quite likely also realizing or recognizing that this God that they served was a God that defended them, a God that was on their side, and a God that they called a father, but a God that they called Almighty God, you know, or the Mighty One. Power and authority was the way in which they related to their God. We observed this. I observed it along with a couple of my colleagues, and for about 2 or 3 weeks, we would visit with them, and eventually they would even invite us to sit with them. And we didn't have anything to say, but we basically listened. And I developed respect for them in that regard. Now, I'm sharing that because a few weeks later, in the same community, I noticed that there was a big shuffle and some young men crying out, and there was obviously a conflict in the community. And one of the young men that was there was a young man that I had responsibility for under the law. And I sent for him and asked him what happened. And he was very, very angry and loudly telling me that he was brutally assaulted by the Don. And I said, for what? Well, he was just crying. He didn't have anything to say to me. So I went into his yard and sat with him for a little. And I said to somebody, can you go and, well, I asked the young man, would you go with me to meet with the Don? He wouldn't go, of course. But so I asked somebody if they would let the Don know that I was there. Of course, I had met the Don before in this little devotional circle. And so the Don came. And believe you me, that Don was not more than about 26, 27 years old. And I said, hey man, what's happening? And he said, hi, Elder. That's how he referred to me. He says, hi, Elder. So I said, what's happening to, and I called the young man's name. And he said, Elder, let me tell you, him too rude, man. Him out of order. That's what the Don is telling me. Actually, the Don came with two of his colleagues. They don't travel alone. So I said, what has he done? And he told me the story. He said that they had been kind of harassing a couple of the young girls. They wanted to get a hold of them, you know, and so on. And the girls resisted them, and eventually the girls came and reported them to the Don. And the Don sent for them and said, what you doing with these young ladies? Well, according to the Don, he is saying to me, you know, I know the fella, you know, but I just asked him what he was doing with them, you know. And according to the Don, and him disrespect me. Him shout out at me and say, what you want to do with me? And put him hand in his pocket like, you don't know what he was going in his pocket for. You know, him could be going in there for anything. So they come to the Don and say, Elder, him disrespect me. So I grab him and I lay some licks on him. He must respect his leaders. Well, that is how he put it. So, you know, we said, okay, we'll work on this. Of course, when I sat down with the young man and I looked at him, the licks he got was not from a belt or from a whip. He got licks from a piece of lumber. And you would think that his collarbone was broken, the way he got licks on him. But, you know, subsequently, I talked with the elder and respected him, of course, and said, well, I understand what you are saying, and just said it may have been harsh. But of course, the elder has a whole perspective on life, which he began to share and say, boy, we in charge down here, you know, sir. And the youth then must respect the girls, you know, and mustn't harass them. Of course, the Dons are in charge of everything. And so they had their way of explaining everything, and he explained to me that he likes the youth, the young boy, but he must have respect. And, you know, that taught me a lot. The interesting thing is that this same Don, later on, perhaps in a few months and so on, no, in about a year's time, I noticed that he lost his locks. I didn't know why. You don't ask those questions. And I just tried to figure out whatever really happened. At the same time, there was a rift between the community, the next door community and his community, and the Dons from the next door community. The Don was trying to come against my friend, the Don in this community. And when I really inquired what was happening, I realized that he fled from the community and went to another neighborhood community where he could hide. And I found out why. Do you know why? He fled because he was really going through a change in his own personal life, in which he was not being as harsh and as violent, and he was trying to teach a new way of respect and peaceful coexistence amongst his own peers. And his colleagues, as Dons, thought that he was becoming soft and weak, and that can't run the community. So they, in fact, began to come against him and began to share what was happening with the Don from next door. And the Don from next door began an offensive to come against this Don. By this time, he's around 29, 30 years old. And he fled and went to another community next door. Very interesting. When he tried to come back, the cops got a hold of him and took him and put him in a jail. And we tried to figure, what did he really do? Of course, nobody could ever say. But because of our relationship in the community, we went to the cops and discovered that, and this is really private information, the fact is that the cops did not take him in because he did anything. They actually took him in to protect him. And so he was in there in the cell, and he must have been in there for about 3 months. And we were the only persons who could go and visit with him. And we realized that he really was going through a change. And while all of that was happening, the Don from next door took over his community. And that was a real crisis for him, because he had his baby mother who was pregnant, and a young girl, but she was pregnant and she was over there. Sometimes she had to steal away to go and look for him, and so on. But here's what I am coming. So after a while, within about 6 months, the Don was actually killed by the police. And that's another story I won't go into. But the truth is that if he had remained the Don in that community, quite likely he would have been the one that would have been killed by the police because of what was happening in the community. In a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I'm pulling the story together. What really happened is that he confessed that he was giving his life to the Lord, and he was following us, not outwardly, but he was listening to us, and he liked the way we were and was following our example. Months later, a couple of years later actually, he actually started to come to one of our churches and began to work in the church certain ways. And as the story goes on, as a matter of fact, today, he is a leader that has an organization that actually goes around into inner cities and helps to restore young men. And he's even used on the media now in programs to discuss the issue of community violence, gang violence, and so on. Why am I sharing this with you? I am sharing it with you because there are certain things that I have discovered about men. Men in that kind of situation, there are things that they are looking for. You know, there are things that they want. They insist on respect. They insist on reasoning. You can't come with any big mouth to them. You have to sit and reason. And they talk about it, you know. They say, well, make we reason, no? We reason. We find that they love discipline. And they themselves are very, very disciplined. When you're a gang leader, you have to be disciplined. When you're leading your community, you have to be disciplined. And they were doing that. And like most men, they wanted to be in control. Anywhere they are in charge, they have to be in control. It's like they want to be leaders, in charge and in control. Amazing, amazing. They love productivity. They like to see things happen. And he himself had a shop in which he was selling stuff, you know. And although he left the community, he put his baby mother there to take care of. And they love productivity because they have to make money. Of course, a lot of the ways they make money is not legal, but the point is they want to be productive. And let me tell you something. They have to own their territory. Ownership is critical. I'm saying these things that are real and true in the inner city community, just as it is true in homes, in the middle class and the upper classes and in the corporate world. It's the same dynamics that operate. But they have grown up in a setting in which law is set by them, not by the society, because they don't trust the society. They feel that they have been done in by the society. They feel the society is after them. They feel the police are against them. And so they protect themselves. They train their own youngsters. They find ways to get guns. They find ways to make money in illicit ways. The law of the land is not their law, but they set their own laws, and their communities better obey them. Men like this, they, not just dons now, I'm talking in a broader setting. When they feel defeated by society and by life, you know, they easily become depressed. And I can tell you that a lot of men in the world today are men who are not only defeated, but are very depressed, and they become disoriented. They feel as if they have no purpose in life, and they really will go against everybody and against everything. And in fact, they become destructive, they become deceptive, and they become destructive. For a man to be a deceiver is nothing. It's a way out, because he has to find a way out to exercise control for himself. This is really what has happened to a lot of the men. I'm changing now the scenario. I've worked with men who are gay and have discovered that a lot of gay men have become gay, and a lot of them think they are gay, but they're not gay. Let me give you an example. I had two young men come to see me one day, and they were very close, good friends, not gay to each other, but they were good friends. And actually, it's one of them came to me on behalf of both of them. And he was saying to me that his colleague has gone gay. And he's gay too. He said both of them are gay. But why they've come to me now, he has come to me, is because his colleague has been is about to get married to a guy. No, I'm talking about the Caribbean. He's getting married to a tourist, a guy from England, who has come down and want to take care of him, education, do everything to him if he will marry him. So he's supposed to be getting married. So his colleague, his friend now, is very, very disturbed about it because they're good friends. And it shows that although they have been kind of moving around in the gay society, this friend is now proving to be gay, but he himself, he's telling me, is gay, but he don't have no friend and him never get involved in anything and so on. So I was talking with him, and the more I talked with him, the more I realized that he was an artist, very creative, I mean, very extremely gifted. And when he was growing up in his early teen years, a lot of his friends call him sissy. Society, they just call you a sissy because you don't play sport, you don't go to the gym, and all of these things that young boys do, to show themselves mighty and powerful and physically strong and all of that kind of stuff. And he said, so he thinks he's gay too. Plus, he loves a magazine. You know what magazine he loves? He loves the magazine called Atlas, which advertises all of these fantastic men with muscles, and he loves to see the muscles. He's attracted to men, he's telling me. He's never had any sexual stuff or anything, and he's afraid that his colleague friend is gone that way, but they all say they are gay. Now, I sat with this young man, and I listened to him, and I wasn't judgmental. I just allowed him to tell me why he was so concerned about his friend, his colleague. I wanted to know whether he was jealous, but it really wasn't that. He was very concerned that he was really going to be taken over by an older man and become a sexual partner. So I spent the time with this young man, and the more we talked, and I looked on the way in which he grew up in his family, middle-class family, with his father and his mother, but his father was really, really very docile and not very engaged. His father was often away and absent from the home, so he didn't really grow up with his father. He grew up with his mother. And basically, cut a long story short, he became feminized. Everything his mother did. He could cook like his mother. He could decorate like his mother. The creativity naturally that was in him was expressed in artistic form, and his very mannerisms and the way he walked was very effeminate. And you could see it in him, actually. Plus, as I said, his friends from he was growing up called him sissy. So he thought that he was homosexual and all of that. I had to spend time talking with him about his vision, his goals, what he wanted to get out of life, how he understood himself, where his disappointments were, how did people relate to him, and all of that. And in the end, I was able to convince him that he was not gay, but he was feminized in his mannerisms, even the way he thinks and so on, largely because of the influence, the feminine influence of his mother and the absence of his father. He felt a little relieved that I could say that to him, and I began to spend time with him in order to affirm him and to help him to see what he was involved in artistically and so on, as not necessarily making him gay, but in fact a way in which who he was on the inside could express itself on the outside, that nothing was wrong in admiring strong men. Perhaps he can become strong too. Interestingly, eventually he joined the gym. So about 3-4 months later, of course I prayed with him. He's a Christian young man and I am a pastor. And about 4 months later, when I was in touch with him again, I said to him, "So how is that young man?" He says, "Boy, pastor, let me tell you this. The man from England, leave him, ditch him, you know." And he was so happy. I said, "Well, can I meet the young man?" Well, it didn't happen, and we have never met. But what came out of that was the need that I saw to help to reaffirm young men who have grown up in a culture that looks at them and identifies them and describes them as what they really are not. And they accept it because it's easier to accept it and just say, okay, I am, you know, although he had never had any sexual experiences. But he was convinced he was gay because he was really effeminate. I could tell you stories. I could tell you stories in the normal world where I have a couple where the wife has been to see me because she's very concerned about her husband because he doesn't really take care of her, and he's not abusive, but the way he treats her, he's not being a husband, and so on. So I don't want to go into that story, but what I'm really sharing with you is that in the normal world, and these are two professional persons, in the normal world, sometimes a man can be overawed by his wife. She's a professional, a very successful woman. He's also a businessman and a successful fellow, but his wife was kind of too strong for him or overbearing, and he never grew up with a father. So he never was affirmed. He never knew what it was to be a strong man. He never knew what it was. They have children together, but he never really came into what it means to father his children, because basically his wife was the one who spent most of that time. In other words, he was robbed, or he allowed himself, I'm not blaming the wife, he allowed himself to be robbed of what it takes to be a man, to affirm his own children, and to be a father. The truth of the matter is a man doesn't really feel fulfilled as a man until he sees himself as a father. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a biological father. He can be a father who has had a dream and who has fulfilled his dream in sons, other young men, other young women, and every man thinks of himself in that way, that he wants his name, his reputation to last beyond his own time. Let me just finish off here because we may be able to ask some questions. Here are some things that I think help to make men men. And I learned a lot of this from looking at the way in which Jesus operated. Imagine Jesus had 12 men around him. I don't know, if you have 12 men around you today, they may ask, I wonder why. You know, but he had 12 men. There were women too, but in the text, of course, they emphasize the men because publicly Jesus gave more affirmation to the men. But here is how and what he did in order to attract men. Number one, men must be example-led. Men look at other men as examples, whether in the sports world, in the corporate world, in the social world. They want men that they can follow. They want heroes that appeal to them, you know. And what Jesus did, Jesus knew. Jesus says, follow me, and I will make you. Isn't that remarkable? If you really want to influence men, you have to become an example to them. Or you have to be able to point to somebody and say, that's what I want you to become. And men follow examples. A second thing is that men must be personally called and privately challenged. Never challenge a man in public. He will react against you. He may come against, he may even agree with you, but you can't do that. Worse, women must never challenge men in the public, right? And Jesus, amazingly, he says, you know, he called them as individuals. You have to call men as individuals. When you have a big crusade, when you have your church and you give an invitation, you see, some of the men are in that audience and they are convicted. But if 30 persons come forward, I guarantee you at least 25 of them are women. Women will respond like that. But men, you have to stop and say, hi, how are you doing? I noticed you in church. How is it for you? And then he will talk to you. You have to attract men as individuals, not as part of a group. And you also can't challenge them publicly. You have to do so privately. Jesus, there are some leaders that came to Jesus by night or that he spoke to in quiet. When Zacchaeus came to Jesus, you know, Jesus says, why don't we meet at home? And he put on a party. And that's where Jesus challenged him. A third thing I have noticed is that men are purpose-driven. Purpose-driven. A man wants to have a goal. Men are like that. Men want to pursue something. Men want to conquer something. Men are explorers. You know, in their nature, their nature is just like that. And so Jesus says, I will make you to become. I will make you to become. You see? And that's how we need to appeal to men. And then men are leadership motivated. In other words, I want to make you a governor. I want to make you a hero. I want to make him a success. Don't just tell a man you have a job for him. Tell him what you want him to become. Because men want to be leaders. Men want to be motivated to control. Men want to be in charge. I'm just talking about what a man is. And if we don't handle men in that way, you may really lose them. Another thing I found that about and it was true about him too, is that men must be affirmed. Remember Jesus? His father says, "This is my beloved son." He said that in public. And men need to be affirmed in public. If you don't affirm a man in public, and he has to affirm himself, man, if you ever hear his story about what happened, he tell you a story that is bigger than life. You see? Wives need to learn that. You need to speak well of your husband in public. Don't let them have to speak well of themselves. Otherwise, they'll always blow it up. But they also need to be affirmed privately. You see, because sometimes they don't know if they must believe you publicly. But when you sit with them and say, you know something, you really are great, you know. What I saw you do yesterday, that was remarkable. How did you do it? You have to affirm men. And then I just want to say that there's a very interesting thing about the way men relate. And I think we see it exemplified in the scriptures, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Men relate covenantally or contractually, you know. Oh yeah, women are passionate and so on. Men have passions too, I'm not saying they don't, but the way in which a man commits himself is covenantally. And he will make a covenant, which is like a contract, that he will commit himself to, come hell or come high water. You know, a man must be a man in his relationships covenantally, and he will stick to it. Jesus said this too. He says, if you love, then you will die for one another. That's a true friend. Somebody who is prepared covenantally to defend, to fight for. You know what I'm saying? If you touch him, you have to touch me too. You know, that's a man talking. Women talk this way. And then finally, I just want to say that I think I made a statement before that a man doesn't become a man until he becomes a father or he discovers fatherhood in two directions. One, he has to discover who is his father. Do you know that when the first man was made, he was made alone, and God breathed in him his own spirit, and that gave a man a sense of strength and an identification with God. Sometimes, and because of sin, man become idolatrous, and in fact wants not just to be with God, but to replace God. That's why it's so difficult to get men to commit themselves to God. They want to know, you know, what will that mean? Does that demean me? You see? But women relate to God. Men tend to replace God. At least he feels that way. And we need to get men to be committed to God is to let them know that God had a dream. And that dream is to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth, to have dominion over three spheres: over the sea, the water sphere, over the air sphere, and over the land sphere. That's what man wants to do. And God was like that. God was put fatherhood in the seed of a man. And every man has a dream that's bigger than him. That's why he wants to become a father, so that a generation can be raised and preserve his legacy. Isn't that amazing? I've tried to pull together both some practical experiences and then what I've learned from it, so that we can understand how men really are. not only the men who are disoriented and are destructive in society, but men who are, so to speak, respected leaders in society. They still struggle with their manhood. And so let's help men to deal with their gender and sexuality. Let's help men to deal with their anger and their control of themselves. And we need to help men to become leaders in their own right and possessors of an inheritance that they can pass on to others. If we don't, dog eat your supper. I'll stop there in case we have some questions.
Yes, Dr. Morgan, you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My name is Alistair Thompson.
Yes.
And my question is, you made an interesting point about men disoriented.
Yes.
My concern is there seems to be a self-fulfilling prophecy in the world where men are referred to as being dogs.
As what?
Being dogs.
I'm not getting that word clearly.
Dogs.
Dogs.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Basically, a stigma is being placed often on men whereby a world perception that they seem to be deficient, etc. You see, for example, in weddings, you'll see a bride and a groom walking up the aisles, and it always seems that the adoration is always for the bride and as a lamb, and the groom as a wolf, right? As a world perception. So I'm wondering, is it that the perception of men in general as deficient and incompetent and no good needs to be changed? That perception needs to be changed by society, the way they look at men, or is it that the men need to start doing that work to change? Because, I mean, it seems on either side to be a difficult proposition. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you have, in asking the question, you have in fact answered it partly. Yeah, the society, the culture in which we have grown up, especially in some of our developing nations, where men have in fact been dehumanized, treated as dogs, animals, beasts. Men who have grown up in a slave society know that their manhood has been stolen from them. They have been battered and beaten, and they have been treated as beasts and as animals, and their women have been taken away from them. Men have, as slaves, men have not been given what is endemic to them, and that is the control of their environment, the control of their resources, the control of their own abilities and potential to do what they want. They have been maltreated, mistreated, and in fact they have become, that's why I use the term disoriented, because men are really lost. They've lost their sense of identity. Now, there are two ways in which I try to tackle it. One is to help them not to identify themselves with the way in which people describe them, but rather they have to go back to the very beginning. And there is a certain pride, not a negative pride, but a kind of pride that a man needs to hold on to when he understands that from the very beginning of creation, the male man was set in the world first in order to take care of God's real estate and of God's property and of God's world. Not only that, it is in the man that God breathed. God breathed into man and gave him the DNA or the Spirit of God. See? A man has to see that the fatherhood of God was given to him. He was given a seed that carries the DNA of the human race. In all of these ways, we have to help men to have a new sense of confidence of who they are. Now, here's something that I teach, and sometimes it's not popular, or sometimes it's not understood properly. And that is that God has given to every man an ego identity. But without God, that ego identity has not turned outward towards helping his mate, helping to manage the world, helping to give leadership. It has turned inward to defend himself. He becomes angry and defensive. He uses it to, in his sexuality, to overwhelm and power the opposite sex, you know, and he uses it in what we call his own flesh man, that is, to satisfy self. So a man's ego, which is given to him by God, to be able to manage the earth, to take care of the animals, to husband his wife, to raise his children, and take care of God's property. A man needs that. What it has done is to make him what we call now in psychologists call egocentric, that is, to serve himself. As a result, he beats his wife, he ill-treats, he neglects his children, he abuses the environment, and he becomes deceptive in the world, right? So a man, to rediscover his manhood, he has to, there's no compromise on this, he has to find God. Secondly, men must be encouraged in their manhood by women. Sometimes we don't understand this, but it says, men, love your wives. It says, wives, be submitted to your husbands. It's not a submissiveness that makes man able to make you a doormat. Rather, it is a submissiveness to say to a man, I'm prepared to serve you. I'm prepared to encourage you. Actually, I try to tell wives that it is good for them to speak well of their husbands in public and to boost their ego. When a man comes in and tells you how his day went, and you think him tell you as if him conquer the world, what must you say? Don't say, honey, he didn't really do that. No. What you must do is say, wow, you're really my hero. Tell him that, you know. And a woman needs to be the strength of a man in the emotional side of life. So men need women who will affirm them, who will take care of them, serve them, and who will speak well of them, and who will finally produce for them, not all women of course, only those with whom they have made a covenant, but produce for them an offspring that makes a man really feel like a man. So I think we who are taking the initiative in helping men to become men. I think we need to bear in mind some of these things. And the question you have asked is very, very important. We cannot go the way of the world. We can't follow Hollywood. We can't follow the way the politicians do it. We can't follow the way the financial tycoons do it. We can't even follow the way the entertainers talk about it. You know, we have to go straight back to God. And we have to depend on the support of our women. I hope that has been helpful.
Yes, it was, Dr. Morgan. So we have another question here from Mr. Husband.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan, for that enlightening discussion. One thing I want to get from your experience, you mentioned that, particularly referring to the dons or those persons who seem not to be subscribing to society's laws, how can we get those who want to retreat out of mainstream and follow their own laws? How can we get those men to conform to law, order, morality, and justice?
Yeah, that is really the task we have had in working in the inner city. First of all, we show a lot of respect to the dons because we believe that, well, I grew up in Jamaica, and one of our prime ministers in the 1980s, 70s and 80s, he did something which I think was very, very helpful. He had a saying, respect due. And this is Mr. Manley, Michael Manley, he was saying to the whole society that we must respect our men and respect the people in the poor and so on. Respect them. It had a tremendous impact. When we go in a community, and I'm not afraid to go into any community, even I'm very much in Trinidad now, and I go into any community. They may not know me, but my disposition is one that looks at a man and just said to him, respect due. When you show respect, you disarm somebody, you will disarm at least men. So showing respect. The other thing is reasoning. It's very, very important not to confront men, to reason with them. It's good to confront them, don't mistake me. You confront where there's obvious wrong, and you say, but this is not right. However, you must do it in a context in which you're trying to understand, so why did you do that? What made you act that way? What benefit has it brought to you or to them? Men follow reasonings more than they follow feelings. So if you come at men, just from the feelings standpoint, you may lose them because they're going to stand up against you and resist you. But it is very important to reason with men. One of the things, like the story I told you about this Rasta fellow who was a don and who today is one of the leading figures that they use on the television, to counsel youngsters, and they have on panels talking about it because he's probably in his 40s now. Not probably, he's about in his 40s, but he is now helping youngsters, follow the law. But the real problem, we put the problem on the guys in the inner city without realizing that the reason why they have become this way is because they feel as if they have had to protect themselves against society, the wealthy and well-to-do. They feel that the police is not for them, but the police is for the status quo and for the wealthy and for the power brokers and so on. You know, there's a whole thing that has to change, and we have to be careful that we're not just blaming them for being against the law. We have to stop and ask ourselves, is the law not against them? And it's not the law itself, you know. It's the keepers of the law. It's the guardians of the law. It's the makers of the law. It's the people for whom the law works best, you know. So it's not an easy question to answer, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it has to take place as part of a dynamic, as part of a change process. And I'm sure, Gordon, you may have found in your sphere where you're actually dealing with guys who break the law, and criminals and people that you have to reorient and so on. Not easy. It takes a long time. And I am also again saying that let us not try to do it without a consciousness of God. If you can make a man feel that God is not against him, so he can commit himself to God and therefore become part of God's law, then that man will also defend the law of the land. There's a law that's bigger than the law of the land, and that is law and principles of life set out by God in the Deuteronomic Code. We actually, Howard, we build programs and mentorship programs to take people from where they are to where they need to be, without being judgmental, but helping them to make the right kinds of decisions depending on what kind of outcomes they're really after. I have a saying now that fathers dream dreams and their sons build cities, because I've discovered that the thing that makes a father is that he has a dream. And I got that from God. God had a dream. He made the world, and he looked on it and he thought, I have no one to take care of it. So he made a man, and he trained the man in the garden, put him in charge of the animals, and after, I don't know how long, but after a while of training him to husband, he says, you know, you need a wife. And so he gave him a wife, and through that wife, now that he's husbanding her, God's dream comes true, because they can have children who can carry out the dream of their father. And the whole of the Old Testament, in the first 9, you have to say the whole Old Testament, is a story of how, first of all, God rested after he made man, because he says, man will do the work. I will reign while they rule and govern. And the rest of the story is about how Adam had children with Eve, of course, and how they became the fathers of cultures and of communities and of cities, and ultimately, through Abraham, of an example nation. It's a long story. We broke the principle by sin, and we have to mend it by being reconciled back to fatherhood. Yeah.
All right. We have a question now from the Honorable Dr. C.
First of all, I must say I was profoundly moved by what you said. It edifying me, and it have empowered me to go and glorify God in what I do. I just want to ask you, what role does character play in developing a successful father? That's all. What role does character play in developing?
Oh my goodness. It is critical. It is critical because what character really is the person on the inside. We are made physically, spiritually, we're given personalities. All of these are given to us by God. But what we do with it is really what is called character. It is something that we have to build and what we own for ourselves. The kind of personality I have, I can't take credit for it. This is just the way I was made. But the kind of character I have, and of course we could break down character into different dimensions and different levels and different spheres. But character is like the railroad track that you actually set. If you have a track that you want to go from, let us say, Remo down to Point 14. I know you don't have rail tracks in Trinidad, but if you had a track, that track is already set. The car or the train has to be put on the track, and it has to be aligned to the track, stay on the track, and be empowered to move along that track. And he knows, the driver knows, that as long as he remains on the track, he will get to Point 14. Character is like the track that will get you there if you stay on it. Or it's like the sails on a ship or a boat, a sailboat, you know. I mean, the wind may be contrary and powerful and all of that, you know. The sails on the ship could be easily tossed over, but the sails on the ship, as long as you shape and manage the sails can triumph over the wind, no matter how powerful it is. As a matter of fact, the more powerful the wind is, the quicker they will get to their destination if the sails will guide them there. And the sails are like the character. One more illustration that just comes to mind, of course, we're using the computer in these days, and characters like the hard drive, right? It has the ability, but you have to program it. What you program on the hard drive, you can then draw on it afterwards, and people can come and look at it and see your story and all of that. I think we have to understand that character is not easy, that it's a journey, but it is something that if you don't have it, then all the gifts you have, all the dreams you have, and all the money that you have will destroy you. It is character that gets you there.
Okay, well, we still have to actually share what our upcoming workshops will be about. Doc, thank you very much. You know, it is always a pleasure. Right? And don't run away. You've been here with us, and I know you would stay there with us till the...
Definitely, I will.